Well, welcome everyone. Welcome back for our second edition of Coffee Chats with Coach. And I am Tim Boyko. I have the honor of serving as the head of strategic growth at Hire, where we validate, activate, and accelerate everyone to achieve the impossible. And we do that with our state-of-the-art analytics. And you can reach out to me to learn more about that. DM me on my LinkedIn profile. And I have with me the best, the one and only executive coach, Ron Kardashian. And I want to give a little bio about him because he's so humble and you guys need to know the wealth of knowledge this man possesses. And so he is the author of the book, 30-Second Solution. And I will later in the show here put a link to this on Amazon. But you got to see what was said about this book. So TD Jakes, who is arguably one of the top 25 African-American influencers in America, said this about this. He goes, Ron Kardashian introduces new breakthrough information in this book for transforming old patterns into dramatic turnarounds for those who want to derive more purpose and satisfaction from life. And that's a lot of what's driving these coffee chats with him, is to get information to you to help you achieve better results in life, professionally and personally. And then I also want to bring in here about Dr. Daniel Amen. Dr. Daniel Amen, he just has an amazing foreword in this book. And I want to read a quick section of here. So we talked about the prefrontal cortex and how this is the front third of the brain that does all of the brain's executive center, the thinking, the forethought, judgment, and so forth. And he goes, when the prefrontal cortex works right, people follow through on their goals despite challenges and obstacles. So that's what we want to dive into here with psychological safety, dealing with shame, psychological safety, and performance. And so there's two aspects that I want to take with Coach Ron here. And the first one is, of course, when we think about shame, it's self-thought life. It's how we think about ourselves. It's the thoughts that we're meditating on. That's one thing that we'll get into. And the second thought here that I want to get into is a lot of people work in work environments where their bosses frequently use shame and condemnation as a way to motivate. And we want to talk about some tools that people can use to protect and equip themselves in those kind of environments. All right. So then before I will let you think about that a little bit here. I want to do a quick recap of last week here. So last week we introduced the concept of psychological safety, where we went through and again, bring everyone up to speed real quickly here on the definition of psychological safety. So this is the definition by Amy Edmondson, who's seen as kind of the founder of the concept of psychological safety. She's a professor at the Harvard Business School. But she goes, psychological safety is the belief that you won't be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And from that, we dived into that. We talked about coherence. We talked about internal psychological safety. You gave us some breathing patterns to help become one between the heart and the brain. And so with that, we want to continue on because we know a lot of people struggle with shame and condemnation when it comes to psychological safety as individuals and as teams.
I love this. I love this topic. It's so important because I deal with executives who deal with imposter syndrome. Very high level people, very highly successful people often are judging themselves, and I've helped them to stop abusing themselves. We don't think of psychological safety first as an internal system, but psychological safety stems, as you so beautifully said, from how people perceive themselves. And this assessment that we use here at our clinic basically helps to identify and shift internal narratives. So I think, to your point, rewiring negative thinking is the foundation of every acceleration in our life. Even the coach, part of one of my new sayings is the strongest leader in the room is the most vulnerable. That doesn't mean cliche, cheeky, or weak. In fact, men, as we're taught early years, It was never taught to be vulnerable. It's very taught to be very stonewalled, very, covered. And I have found through the years that the more transparent I am about my own liabilities in the marketplace, at home, in my marriage, raising children, it's like we all have these negative inputs that are constantly challenging our overall well being. And the more we talk about them, the healthier we become. So I'm going to give three keys of psychological safety. And as it relates to my beautiful book that you opened up, not that you even need to buy the book, I'm going to give it away to you for free right here in these three keys. Um, Number one, rewire negative thinking. This builds internal confidence and self-worth. One aspect of remaining safe is moving from fear-based thinking, self-critical thinking, to empowering beliefs. Now, I know there's a lot of people that talk about this whole positive affirmation thing. I want to go one level deeper. We are all faced with these negative narratives. We call them limiting beliefs. A lot of people talk about this. But here's the solution. We have a tool called the CR tool. It's called cognitive replacement. Tim is smiling because you remember this tool that we used with you. I don't know if
Absolutely.
you told people you were a client before you became one of our technology generals. But Tim and I worked with him on let's switch the conversation. And cognitive replacement is literally trapping the thought that you have in your mind. It could be, I'm worthless, or that person always gets the raise, or gosh, I wish I felt better about myself with the amount of money I make. That's another big one. A lot of people's self worth is different than self confidence. And through cognitive replacement, you trap the thought. You literally speak out of your mouth. If you're in public, put your hand over your mouth. I'm not that person. I replace it with a healthy thought. I am beautiful. I am wealthy. I am successful just because I'm a human being. It's not based on the PhD, your position, your net worth. It's not based on any of that. It's just the fact that you are a human being that's deserving of love. And when individuals feel confident, this is powerful and valued internally, which sometimes we can't get from the external world. The company can't give it. The coworker can't give it. The spouse can't give it. They are more likely to contribute openly and support a positive team dynamic, which fosters group-wide psychological safety. This is a key breakthrough for superior leadership, not operating in superiority, but operating in authority. Gentle authority is what I call it, stems from a rewiring of negative thinking. Does that help answer that, Tim?
Yes, absolutely.
Should I go on to the second point?
Let me see if there's any questions in the
Oh,
comments right now.
great.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any. Sure, let's go to the second point then.
Number two, I think you brought up a great point. Dr. Daniel Lehman, who endorsed my book, I talk about imposter syndrome. Let me give you a real life situation I went through. 9 years ago, when I finished the book on cognitive renewal, and the book's called 30-Second Solution, it was based off of these business leaders and ecumenical mom and dads, everyday people like us, who had dealt with these 30-second decisions that basically cost them the next 30 years of their life. In the book, I talk about 30 seconds, 20 million, that this guy did not, he froze when the market was crashing. Something we need to be cognizant of now. Go with your gut. You can always buy the stock later. If you're in the green, sell the stock. It's okay. If you're in the black and you feel comfortable holding it, what I'm teaching now is internal coherence, where you have to have proper healthy function for supporting emotional regulation and empathy. Sometimes we don't coach ourselves in being empathetic to how we feel. We're listening to the news, we're listening to other people, we're listening to investors. And while all that is great, because I'm saying wisdom is a defense, we have to, at the end of the day, go with ourselves. This enhances prefrontal cortex function. So one of my stories is I dealt with this deeply when I was persecuted after the book launched. I was the subject of defamation, slander, which was all vehement partly truthful stuff. They mentioned this guy was a former addict. I went to high school with him, and all of that was true. But it was the way that they did it with such vindictiveness and hate because of the success of my book and, of course, the popularity. When you have big names like Daniel Amen and TD Jakes and, doing endorsements, people begin to bash. You know what happened to me? I developed PTSD. I wouldn't even feel safe walking around in my own neighborhood. In fact, I received several death threats after that. And I didn't have somebody helping me process, enhance prefrontal cortex function. Yet I was the author of the book. Daniel Amen said, if you do what Ron Kardashian says, his techniques will help you. Guess who needed to have empathy on himself? Moi. Yeah, exactly, Tim. And I've told you about these stories before. The book emphasizes strengthening the impulse control, focus, and forethought. It is the most executive center of the brain, and it's responsible for these things, but these traits are critical to psychological safety. Why? Because they allow leaders and team members to manage reactions in an area that I had not mastered. I became very reactionary towards my wife. In fact, it stayed with me and my children for many, many years. And now with EMDR therapy, private executive coaching, I've kind of become a trauma expert because I didn't realize that defamation of character in the workplace, slander, murmuring, hate, backbiting, these affect heartfelt people and people in general. And we need a little extra oomph, right, in order to shift our environment. And where others feel safe to speak, because without fear of judgment or retaliation, you open yourself up to a whole other conversation, a place that I'm walking in now. But it took me many, many years to get there. I was always somewhat guarded, so my words were slightly skewed. For example, if your family tells you you're a little passive aggressive, don't shoot that down.
Yeah.
It might be a warning sign that you need to fix an area in your heart that maybe wasn't even your fault to be injured. It was the direct result of no psychological safety.
So from here, this is really an important foundation because in corporate America, we sit either on conference calls or in conference rooms with conference calls. And of course, everything's about speed, 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 speed,
Yeah.
and speed.
Yeah.
And a lot of the pressure that comes with a speed and fast-paced marketplace, it is so important. And I'm going to really emphasize this because our corporate environments do not encourage a place to pause, emphasize with yourself before responding. One of the things that I teach leaders on is what is true active listening. Well,
Yes.
without being coherent between your heart and your head, you're not going to have true active listening.
Yeah.
How can you really be listening to everyone around the room on the team or on the Zoom call when you're just thinking about the next response to what someone said because you're trying to defend your argument versus really understanding your head heart coherence, your team's coherence with that,
Yeah.
truly processing what they're saying, reflecting, and then responding. And so,
Beautiful.
with the speed that we have in corporate America, we're literally creating an environment that doesn't encourage people to empathize with themselves the way they really need to process information and to respond with the full intellect of the mind and heart. Because
Yeah.
all conversations are not just a mental response. When you're coherent, it's truly a heart mind response.
That's correct.
And so this is the
Just
core
to add to
foundation.
that, just to
Sure.
interject, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I wanted to capitalize on what you're saying is that science is now showing that there are over 40,000 neurological connections in the heart.
Wow.
And studies have shown
Wow.
that the heart has more influence on the brain than the brain has on the heart.
Wow.
So we always meet people that say, "Oh God, I love that guy. He speaks from the heart," or "She is all heart," or "God, she's such a lovely person." And we remember these characteristics in leadership, like the hard-nosed, get the work done, meet your sales quota. That hard, stern behavioral trait was really good in the 70s and the 80s. But now that we're in 2025,
Yeah.
it's like human ability has evolved, and we know that motivation stems from the power of authority and kindness rather than a disposition of superiority and firmness. It's two different forces of leadership, which one will argue, well, if I'm not hard on them, a coach, then they're not moving. That's not true. I coached a big tech company out here in the Silicon Valley. They outsource all the engineers. And the CEO, I actually really liked him. He was an alpha male. He was very much a playbook guy. Well, when I showed him our executive assessments, the beautiful graphs and everything, I mean, his eyes glowed because it literally became a playbook for the CEO to help lead and direct his team. Well, this one particular gentleman, man, was got a heart of gold. And I started to hear about his faith in the marketplace. I started to hear about his marriage, or really his girlfriend at the time. I started to hear about his failures, his addictions, but yet he was their top guy. And when I began to coach him, I came from a space of empathy and power. And Tim, I don't remember if you remember we talking about this guy, but he became a lifelong friend. And hopefully he's listening now. And his numbers hit the highest in that sector. When the
Wow.
company cut off the executive coaching budget, which they should have never done, I gave them 50% off. He immediately began to plummet. Why? Because the behavioral characteristic and the breach of psychological safety for that man was compromised, and he began to shut down. So to your point, um, I think it's mandatory that we continue these conversations because learning how to process the arrogance, the power, the authority, or the misconstrued use of power actually creates more psychological safety for ourselves as we become coherent with our own body needs.
That is so powerful. Like one of the things that I'm thinking of listening to this is the old phrase, water off a duck's back. When you are coherent and know who you are, you're in tune with the real you, what is happening outside the environment is going to have less impact on who you are, and you will actually be a greater influence on the environment around you.
Yeah,
And so even when you are in a bad environment, even when the manager is one of those power hungry, using fear and shame and all of that, but when you come into work because you know who you are, you've taken time, like I meditate, you take time to be coherent with yourself. What they say about you, what they say and how they run things will have less of an impact on you, and
yeah.
you will begin to influence them. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And just for sake of time, the last point there, to piggyback on your comment, which I think is that you guys need to know, Tim and I didn't, we go off the cuff on purpose because I want to teach this as a leadership coach is that prepare your notes, right? I have notes here. I've done the homework, right? I've written books on this stuff. But when we're engaging in leadership training or development, you want to be as authentic as possible. And if I am book smart and not heart smart, you're going to feel it. And so I told Tim, let's just you lay the subject matter, I'll answer the questions because I do this stuff in my sleep. So you mentioned something which is actually part of the third key. So we have number one, rewire negative thinking, building internal confidence and self-worth, the premise of psychological safety. Number two was enhancing prefrontal cortex because it supports emotional regulation and empathy where you are in control. And number three, Tim, that you mentioned is the power of the pause. Now, I wrote about this almost 10 years ago, and a lot of people have brought this up, but it's the interruption of incorrect behavior. That's what the pause does. And I never forget this because I met a very astute billionaire years ago. He's one of my first clients. I had the honor of coaching a gentleman who sold his company for $40 billion. Yeah, that's not a mistake. 40 billion. He changed my life because of his disposition. He was a master at the pause. And in my book, 30-Second Solution, I train individuals to pause before reacting, an area I'm still working on. It's one thing to have the revelation, but it's another thing to have the application. And this moment of intentional reflection is what I call it, reduces emotionally charged responses and encourages thoughtful, respectful communication. And how you do it is you just pause. If someone comes at you, you can literally put your hand over your mouth. In fact, I do that all the time when Tim is talking because I am a speaker, I am a coach. It is my gifting to give insights. But there also needs to be the development of a trained ear to where you have to stop yourself from talking and deeply, intentionally be coherent to the listener. Now, here's the power of this: people will feel more secure around you. You will be more secure within yourself, and it is an instant form of psychological safety. People stopped abusing me when I stopped abusing myself. It's the law of epigenetics, which we'll get into in the future. Epi means beyond, genetics. So there's something beyond your ability to act like your parents did. An area of excuse, I constantly blamed my temper. I'm Italian. My mother was like this. My father was like this. And my wife was like, this has almost cost you your marriage, you know. I had to come into psychological safety within myself. So, in psychological safe environments, people feel secure, right? People know that they have difficult conversations, they're going to be met with calm. And consider responses not blame or anger. Consider responses, not blame and not anger. And this is an area where I have fallen so many times, Tim, where I have resorted to a reaction instead of a response. And a lot of you already know this, just like my pro athletes do. The pro athletes, stronger, wealthier, drives better than me. I'm getting close though. But they have a coach because anybody who's into mastery is into fundamentals. And the fundamental is hearing it over and over and over again until it rewires, refires, and you go higher into your own psychological safety. So, these three keys. One, rewire negative thinking and how you perceive yourself. So, we can do some work on that in the future, but just take a little assessment. We have professional assessments that instantly open up the blood work of the brain, thinking processes, strengths, liabilities. And this is a fast track for people who want to increase their self worth and their net worth. Because the more safe you are, the more you're entrusted with. And people want to promote people of safety. So it's actually a way to make more money. My coaching programs went to a new level when I became a safe person, if that makes sense. Number two, enhance the most executive part of the brain, the cerebral frontal cortex. It will support your emotional regularity and your empathy, an area where I don't know about you, but I'm working on empathy. I realized I was a very compassionate coach, but I wasn't very an empathetic one. And I needed to sit in people's pain. I didn't even know what that meant. I learned it in my marriage that I had to get to a place where when my wife was dealing with something, was I coherent to her needs? Or was I brushing them off because of the demands of my schedule and the propensity to think that I'm the provider? That is a form of arrogance, ego, and pride. And I had to come to a recollection that you are being incoherent to the needs of another person. You are psychologically unsafe, Ron. And it was an area that hit me like a bullet between the eyes, ladies and gentlemen. And my clients know it. It's made me a more empathetic person. It's made me a safer person. And these traits are critical to infusing culture in corporations with psychological safety that everyone's crying out for. This is a call to the CEO. You know you're a problem. You know, or you may know your executive is a problem. Be bold and tell them to pick up the phone and get some legitimate, empathetic care. Not just executive coaching, self care, because you are your greatest investment. And then number three, of course, was the power of the pause. I mean, if the father had decided to pause prior to running the red light through an impulsive 30-second decision, risking the lives of hundreds of people as he proceeded through the intersection and hitting a father on his bicycle who had just got done dropping his little girl off at school. That little girl would have a father today, but because of a 30-second impulse decision, ladies and gentlemen, this is a true story. That man, in one impulsive control, not hitting the pause button, has cost him three, 30-year life sentences. One 30-second decision. Read about it on page 89 in the book. They'll teach you how never to make a mistake that will cost you your life.
So impactful.
Lived it, been there,
Wow.
and have the metal to prove it, you know. But change is inevitable. And if it can happen for me, it can happen for anybody. And you can make as much money as you want. You can be as successful as you want, but it does start with your own internal psychological safety.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The power of the pause. I want to dive into that a little bit with the few minutes we have here, because when we're talking about the power of the pause, this is more than just a sales tactic. I know when there's a lot of sales negotiation, they talk about white space in
Mm-hmm.
using that effectively. But this is more than just a psychological pause to negotiate with someone.
Mm-hmm.
This goes much deeper as it's rooted in someone who is in coherence with themselves. So for a couple minutes here, really dive into the power of the pause and why it's different than just using white space for negotiational tactics.
Well, it's a tool. It interrupts automatic reactive behavior. As a cognitive expert, I am constantly in the pursuit of how do we become critical thinkers, not just talk about being one. So when someone feels triggered by disagreement, criticism, or perceived disrespect, the natural tendency is to react impulsively, right? That might manifest as defensiveness, blame, or shutting down. The 30-second pause acts as a neurological break, giving the prefrontal cortex time to engage. This is what coherence does, that we can actually become masterful at engaging with people. I'm doing it now with two executives. One I found was an excessive gambler, probably one of the most successful builders in the region that I was working in. Wanted to build a custom property for me, found out he had this behavior. I paused and said, "How are you doing with that?" Instead of thinking, "Oh my God, you're going to take me and rob my money." See what I mean? Instead of reacting from fear or ego, the pause allows for thoughtful emotional intelligence, not artificial intelligence, intellectual intelligence, divine intelligence. I'm in the pursuit of the highest level of optimization, which super exceeds artificial. Nothing artificial here. This calms conversation and then does something magical. It keeps trust intact. So instead of defaulting to the psychological genre of white noise in corporate America, you know, I have a good time with this. We have fun while we're developing. Um, think about what would not damage another person, and that would be distrust. So this calms conversation, keeps trust intact. Number two, if you're asking me about the pause, it shifts focus from emotional ism to intentionality. And I'm coaching a lot, you know this, Tim, on the power of the intention. Like, what's the intention behind what you're selling me? What's the intention behind you working at Facebook? What are you here for a paycheck? Because you know, a lot of people can feel that. I don't work for a paycheck. I work from deep intention. And the law of intentionality is so powerful. We'll have to do a whole section on this alone. This is the key optimization for emphasizing pause leads to purpose, because I am intentional about this pause because I am seriously on my way someplace, right? And in those few seconds, an individual can check their intentions. Am I trying to be right or helpful? Will my next words build or break trust? And this recenters the conversation on shared goals rather than perceived ego or emotional reactivity. And this is an area that I was really unschooled in. I lost my center. And a lot of us have. So it brings you instantly back to a climate that you're seeking and saving yourself from being abused or saving yourself from becoming a statistic or calamity. It's very powerful.
And so for people who are new to this, it's important to be intentional and make a quality decision to build in 30 seconds to tune
Yeah.
in, take the breath, like the breath exercises you talked about last week,
Yeah.
and build that into your day. I'm starting to do it myself. I'm building it into my day with, and depending on where I am, it's just the breathing, or sometimes I try to get some music, some calming
Love music.
meditation music behind it.
Music is powerful, by the way, because it's a frequency. So you immediately change the frequency. Like we can cry when we hear a song, a love song. In fact, I was doing it this morning. I was trying to get in touch with the needs of my wife. So I put on a song that we fell in love with 20 years ago. And it actually brought me right into the here and now. It was the most coherent, intentional place that I could be. And it was unbelievable. So
Wow,
right on, Tim. Right on.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for people who are new into this is something that you have to be very intentional with, because at least all the big companies I've ever worked for, this is not a natural part of their culture.
But it's really around building self-awareness, which companies, to their credit, have built, and accountability. And when you practice this pause, internal awareness, how your words, how your tone, and your energy affect other people, it creates a culture of ownership. And
Correct.
Facebook has done this, Google's done it, where people pause to consider impact before acting. I think that is the take home. My pause is helping me consider impact before acting. And acting out is something I coach a lot of men in, that they develop these behaviors, right, that are not conducive to their values and to their own integrity, which is understandable.
Yeah,
I've suffered from cognitive dissonance, so I understand it. But yes, we do need to teach it more in corporate America. So let me know when I'm coming to your company,
sounds great.
or you, Tim, because you are just as good, buddy.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. We are at time here, but I put in the link about brain validation. It tells you a little bit about our tool. It's a free training in there that gives you a great overview of the tool, and bring us on board, because we will change yourself. We will change your organization, your teams. Definitely reach out, because this is state of the art, true brain validation, and really heart brain validation technology. And then we also do culture epigenetics. We'll talk about that at another time. But with that, again, Ron's 30-second solution book, get it. It's awesome. And I'll put the link here
Free,
in the
by the
comments.
way. They'll get it for free, by the way. Anyone who goes to brainvalidation.com and goes through the assessment will send you a copy. If you need an additional one, no problem, free of charge.
There you go. You can go to brainvalidation.com as well, and get it through there. You'll take the validation yourself, get to experience it. Great program. I, I'm a client. I'm speaking from personal experience.
Best resume right there.
All right. Well, have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you next week. So have a great day.